Good morning, all attendees, and thank you for joining us on the second session of our conference today entitled Best Practices for Warehouse Automation Readiness with our speaker, Peter Zalinski. With over 20 years of experience in automated identification and data capture for asset and inventory management, Pete Zalinski enables companies to become more efficient, accurate, and connected to their supply chain through his work at Barcodes Incorporated. He understands the importance of not only tracking data, but analyzing it to gain further visibility into the enterprise so that supply chain leaders can actually make better decisions and drive growth. As NetSuite partners, Barcodes has learned best practices for how to implement and support NetSuite warehouse management system implementations, and particularly identifying, deploying, and supporting the right infrastructure that the enterprise might need for their software implementation. Peter's going to share those best practices for warehouse automation readiness with us this morning. Peter, you have the floor.
Wonderful. If you guys will take a moment, I'm going to share my screen. And we can get started with the presentation. So we're going to be talking about best practices for warehouse automation readiness. And our nuggets for supply chain wisdom are going to be coming down to going back to basics. Let me make sure I've got my PowerPoint direction slide running here. I am the Director of Partner Solutions at Barcoding Inc. and a Senior Supply Chain Architect. That basically means I'm the interface between the customer and the solution to make sure we match those two things up properly. So I need to have a thorough understanding of their business problems and their use cases, and then make sure we match up the correct solution to that use case to satisfy their needs. So our agenda for today is three basic things. We're going to review Industry 4.0 and warehouse automation, the concepts behind that, introduce some best practices for warehouse readiness, which is my back to basics argument. And then assuming we have allowable time, I'm going to get into the costs and value justifications for AWMS in case you don't currently have one. There's a lot of people who are considering automating or introducing new processes to make their warehousing and their inventory and assets control a bit more automated and more accurate and more efficient. And we'll get into some of the reasons for that as well. So starting off with Industry 4.0, what we're really talking about is automating that data exchange. We're talking about digitalizing things. That digital transformation that you've been hearing about is really built on all of the previous versions of industry. Water and steam, electric power, and that electronics and information technology is still underlying that. It's kind of like when you walk into a warehouse, you still have people on the floor wandering around, picking things up and putting things down. You might have fork trucks, you might have other types of automation, but still within the warehouse, manual processes are part of the process. A little redundancy there, sorry. The balloon that you see off to the right-hand side is my ode to GS1 standards. The GS1 organization has enabled us to set aside our differences in how we identify products and come to a national or international standard for not only identifying the products, but identifying the events associated with those products and the relationships between those events. That allows us to do that automatic data exchange. That allows us to digitalize our business and create that digital twin and share information across the industry. Now, I really want to get into that concept of GS1 standards, but we don't have too much time on that today. If you're not aware of UPC codes and how they've impacted industry over the past 50 years now, I think you're a little bit behind the times. A lot of companies are still using homemade or industry and business specific barcodes rather than using international standards. And by doing so, they may have created a problem for communicating with other businesses. So GS1 standards is really focused on allowing you to communicate rapidly with your supply chain, both upstream and downstream. So on our next slide, is your warehouse ready for automation? Is your operation really set up for enabling that type of automation and process improvement that allows you to reduce the number of steps or reduce the impact on your workers so that they can add more value and do less, shall we say, mindless travel tasks? If we look back in time, the average warehouse probably looked a lot like this. I call this warehousing 1.0. For those of you who are movie buffs, you're going to recognize this scene as the Ark of the Covenant gets put away into storage. One of the things I want you to notice is there's no machine readable information on any of these cartons. There's no locations in any space in this warehouse. You can't identify where anything is going. One spot looks pretty much like the other. And if that's the way your warehouse is currently set up, we've got a lot to work on. At the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are looking at the warehouse version 5.0, where it's fully automated and people aren't a part of the picture. This could involve robots. This could involve automatic storage and retrieval systems and a combination of all of the above. And frankly, that's kind of rocket science right now. Portions of that exist. You do have nearly fully automated warehouses, but most of the time we're somewhere in between. So really what we're talking about is putting mobile devices in the hands of essential workers so that they can be more efficient, more accurate, and more connected. And some of the examples you see here are fork-mounted displays, whether it's a Windows display or an Android display. That's pretty much the standard now for fork trucks. You have the industrial scan guns with their Android running operating systems. For those of you who have been a part of the AIDC, or the automatic identification and data capture industry for the past 10 years, you've seen that we've transitioned from the old Windows CE and terminal emulation devices that used to be fairly proprietary to a industry standard Android-based process and an Android-based operating system. There's been a lot of benefits to that, one of which is the idea of having more than one application running on that device, so that not only are you using it for warehouse control, but you're also using it for HR functions. You're using it for communications up and down the chain, so that people don't have to spend time walking from one end of the warehouse or one end of the facility to another just to communicate. You can do anything from text to voice to digital input to automation systems running on this same type of platform. And if you've got a smartphone, that's essentially what we're talking about, but a smartphone dedicated to business. And it's got different types of form factors. Mobile printing has become really important for BOPIS, buy online, pick up and store. This type of distribution allows you to find the product, put the shipping label on the product as you pick it, so that as it gets routed through, we know where that product's going. It's shortening the delivery cycle of pick, pack, and ship to pick and ship. Adding voice really speeds up the operation, especially in a fast pick, fast moving environment. With voice, you have the opportunity to be hands-free, still communicate and validate your transactions, but be able to get things done much more efficiently. And last but not least, if you look in the lower right-hand corner, this is not rocket science, this is not the future, this is happening now, a combination of voice and vision to not only enable you to be hands-free, but have your information in front of your eyes so that you can make better business decisions as you're moving throughout the warehouse or moving throughout your environment. Heads-up displays are kind of the new toy that's come about, and they're really revolutionizing some implementations who are able to take advantage of that. For those of you who are familiar with pick-to-light scenarios, pick-to-light is where you've got a warehouse rack and each position has a red or a green light on there. And when the light blinks, that's the product you're supposed to pick. Those systems are great when you have fixed inventory that's going out over a fairly fast period of time and doesn't change. But if your inventory changes, you need to be able to change and reformulate your entire pick-to-light system, and that can be an expensive undertaking. Heads-up displays are allowing you to implement a virtual pick-to-light system that you can change on the fly to enable your associates on the floor, those essential workers, to pick better, pick faster, and get on-device training so that they can do their jobs more efficiently. All of the neat stuff that's coming down the line really involves using mobile devices for essential work to bring the workflow and the process directly to the point of activity, and to be able to control both the feedback for that process as well as the accuracy of that process as it happens. As we move on, we're also seeing an increase in real-time location systems. The idea of a real-time location system is pretty straightforward, but executing can be a little challenging. The concept is, well, I know where all my product is in the warehouse because we put it away to a fixed known location. I know where my worker is because he's riding a fork truck that has either an RFID tag on it or some other form of location identification that says in real time, where is that worker? And I know based upon the workflow what that worker is doing right now. So why should he have to scan a barcode if he's going to a known position to pick up a known product at a known time for a known event? This allows our workers not only to be hands-free, but in some cases workflow-free, because they're literally following the instructions overhead to say, oh, go to this aisle and pick up that product. And when the fork truck arrives there and they grab the wrong product, it gives them a warning saying, no, you're not in the right position. They get redirected to that correct position, they pick the correct product, and they get to move on without having to get off their fork truck to validate it, without having to reach for a barcode scanner, reach around that fork stack to scan a barcode that they may or may not be able to read at that point, depending on how things are set up. Real-time location systems are adding efficiency rather rapidly to operations throughout the world. Another thing that we're seeing is a lot of goods to person and goods to process automation. This includes autonomous guided vehicles and autonomous mobile robots, which are pretty much the same thing. This is made possible by Moore's law, which has increased the amount of computing capacity that we can put on a device, and the idea of manufacturing and warehouse control and execution systems, where they can interweave the tasks of bringing the inventory to the individual who needs to be able to fulfill an order with those goods. If you see in the upper right-hand corner of this set of illustrations, you're going to see a what we call a shuttle system, shuttle-based system, where each object in the stack below one of those little robots contains multiple things inside of its container. And what that robot does is it brings that fixed container up to a picking station so that an individual can pick the product at the time of need, at the time of requirement, and not have to change position. This is really great for operations that have a multitude of small to medium-sized goods that come in a wide variety of, shall we say, configurations. If you think in terms of a shoe store and you're trying to find a particular shoe, you walk into that store. Not only do you want to find this particular brand of Nike or Adidas, you want to find it in your size. And if there's color variations, you want your particular style and color. That's a lot of different factors for a situation, for warehouse situation to store. Goods to person and goods to process, and very good controls over your inventory system allows you to be able to satisfy those needs on demand because you have accurate inventory. Cobots are one way of reducing the travel time in a warehouse so that your individuals are adding value to the operation instead of picking something up and then carrying it off to the shipping dock. A lot of goods to person, goods to process automation literally is they're out on the picking floor at the pick face, fulfilling orders, and then they drop that off on a cobot, and the cobot takes it off to the pack station. Or they're in a situation where they're fulfilling orders in a high pick, high velocity area, and a low pick, low velocity item is being directed to their area so that they can fulfill that order without having to change position. A lot of really cool things happening with cobots nowadays. And at the really high end of automation, here's an example from Swisslog that shows a bunch of different types of automation in play. We're talking about goods to person robots. We're talking about automated storage and retrieval systems. We've got conveyor systems in here, and you even have individuals on the floor who are scanning barcodes. Again, this is kind of rocket science in how it gets deployed and how it gets utilized, but the amount of goods that you can manage in a system like this is truly revolutionary. But what can we focus on today? If you're in a small to medium-sized business, you really have to focus on improving your user experience. What am I talking about? Well, the user experience is that essential worker. If you don't make their job easier, more efficient, and a way for them to be more accurate so that they can perform better, they're going to leave and go someplace else where they can make a higher wage, hopefully doing a better job with more technology. Technology really is an enabler and a change manager. And if you don't have technology in place nowadays, you'll find workers leaving your facility to go someplace where they have technology that allows them to get those spiffs and those higher throughputs that they're being hired for. And it really does come down to what are they doing on the floor Is it designed ergonomically for them to be able to do what they need to do? In the upper left-hand corner, we're talking about using a barcode scanner that can handle not only close ranged within arm's length barcodes, but maybe long range barcodes. So you can put a location tag overhead and be able to scan it with ease. In the second screen, you see a man in a vest standing there next to a mobile workstation. This allows him to do packing on the floor and printing labels right where he's picking the product. So rather than having to stage his equipment, stage his picks, and bring them to a packing station, he's got the packing station with him so that he can either relabel or assign products to cartons much more efficiently. And again, if we're talking about voice or mobile printing, all of these things are ways of bringing the tasks that need to be done in real time to the place where the tasks could be done most efficiently. It's really what it's all about. So what are your best practices in warehouse readiness? In order to enable all of these advanced features of warehousing and distribution, you have to have some basics in place. And what are we talking about here? Well, you need to have a good wireless network. All of these devices use mobile devices that are tied into Wi-Fi. You can deploy 4G and 5G, but those systems currently are a little bit expensive. The prices are coming down as we move forward, but for the most part, it's going to be pretty much standard Wi-Fi. And you have to make sure it's not just an access point you bought at Best Buy and put up in the warehouse. You need to have somebody who can come in and design a wireless system that suits your operations. We have a big conflict between people who think if I just put up more APs, I'm going to get more connectivity. In reality, if you put up more APs and you're not focusing on how they're being deployed, you can actually reduce connectivity because you've added complexity and an overlap. How to describe this really quickly? If you take a look at the wireless network in, say, 2.4G, there's really only 3 bands of wireless available, 3, 6, and 11. Anything other than those 3 bands are called fractional bands, and they're actually sharing spectrum from one of those 3 or 2 of those 3 bands. As you go up in complexity and get into 4G and 5G type infrastructures, you can actually put out too many access points where you're flooding the area with information to the point where the device doesn't know which access points it's communicating with, and it gets lost in transmission. Enough about wireless networks. Basically, make sure you get somebody good to put that stuff in place and have it tested under your conditions to make sure that you get the connectivity and throughput you require. Mobile devices are key, but even more important than those mobile devices are the barcodes they have to scan. You really have to start at the source tag when things are received to make sure that you've got barcodes on your products and or barcodes at your locations about your products so that you have information that you can scan. RFID is the next level of automation beyond barcodes, but if for some reason RFID fails, whether it's due to interference or due to a broken tag, the fallback is always back to barcodes. GS1 standards allow you to be able to identify, capture, share, and use information using known standards across the supply chain. Your UPC code, for example, has what they call a GTIN built into it and built around it that identifies who manufactured the product and what product that specifically is. With GS1 standards and 2-dimensional barcodes, you can actually get more information in a single scan, including lot, serialization, expiry date. All of these things add more efficiency to your operations if you're prepared to handle them. It really does come down to getting barcodes on your products and barcodes on your locations. So let's talk about that a little bit. One of the things that's required is having consistent identification throughout your warehouse so that your associates can find their position and location relative to the orders they have to pick or the orders they have to put away. The more you can decorate your warehouse and make it clean and clear on where things are located, the less people have to rely on what we call tribal knowledge. Oh, I know that product's in the 3rd aisle because the 3rd aisle has a higher ceiling. You really need to be able to say, go to aisle 3 and pick it out of stack 7 so that anybody who comes into the floor can follow those instructions quickly and easily without having to, again, fall back on tribal knowledge or ask someone where that product is. You want to keep things efficient, accurate, and connected. That means putting up hang tags and locations over large floor areas so that they know where this particular floor area is. If you say a product is in your warehouse and you only have 4,000 square feet, depending on the size of your product, I'm pretty sure a new associate could find it. If you're running between 20,000 square feet and 300,000 square feet, any new associate who comes into your warehouse needs to have a map and orientation and something familiar with them to be able to navigate that space in order to get work done. The better job you do of identifying those spaces, the better your employees, your new employees, and your new hires will be able to navigate that space and get their jobs done efficiently. It's all about reducing that onboarding time. And when you've got turnover, onboarding time is a slowdown. You really want to make sure that everything is pretty much consistent to a standard so that if they've worked in another warehouse and they come into your warehouse, they can be efficient and accurate and start getting the job done at speed right away. So warehouse automation readiness really comes down to, starting off with selecting your warehouse management system. As a part of that, you're going to have to take a look at how it's integrating with your ERP system, what your mobile operations look like. Are you doing put away mobile, or is put away a directed task from the ERP system, and a tag gets put on that product at receipt that tells the mobile operator where they're going to put it away. Scan validation is a way of scanning your barcodes to make sure that what they're doing is what they were supposed to be doing and confirming that it actually happened. All of those things lend towards inventory visibility. That digital transformation is required for this to happen. If you've got situations where customers have to, associates have to key in a 20-digit code to identify a product, you've got a problem. The reason telephone numbers are only 8 digits is because they did a study that said you can manage 8 digits fairly reasonably in terms of memory and retention, and get an accurate response when you're trying to key that in. If you've got a 20-digit code, they're going to have to refer back and forth from the product to the keyboard, from the product to the keyboard, and God forbid they're dyslexic or have keying issues. So to set that stage for success, you need to have a good wireless network in place. You want to be using Android mobile devices. Now, I've had customers who say, well, I like using iPods and iPhones. That's great. iPods and iPhones are a very nice platform to work from for your own personal use. But from a industry standard viewpoint, they're horrible. They're not designed for wear and tear. Break, drop, and fix for Apple devices is much higher than for an industrial mobile device. Whether it's an Android mobile device or an older Windows CE mobile device, those are designed for the environment you're working in. The other problem with the iPhone environment is that it's very difficult to get an iPhone to be totally secure as far as what information is being used on that device and where it's being used to. You can lock down an Android mobile device so that it can be a single point of truth and a single source function, or open it up to multiple applications that are designed by you and determined by you what your employees can and cannot do with that device. iPhones aren't really designed around the concept of multiple users signing onto that device and using it in different ways. The Android mobile platform is really dedicated to the idea of efficiency, accuracy, and connectivity. And again, warehouse barcode labels and signage, I can't tell you how much this has an importance when you're rolling out a new system. The way I tell my customers is, so you're getting started with a WMS. You guys have implemented a new ERP system and you're going to be implementing a new warehouse system. You need to get your warehouse set up so that you can efficiently utilize that system. The earlier you get those pieces in place, start changing your signage and updating your signage, the earlier you signal to your employees and your on-force associates that things are going to change and things are going to get better. You're giving them sure signals that you're getting more organized and you're getting prepared to make change. And that's critical. I've been involved in a number of rollouts for small companies where rather than informing their workers ahead of time, they basically did a top down and said, oh, by the way, tomorrow we're implementing the new WMS. First thing we're going to do is put out our signage and labels, and then by the end of the day, we're going to be scanning. And it turned out to be a complete disaster. What they'd done is given their employees no expectation of change and created a lot of friction for that process during startup. The more you can communicate and the more ways you can communicate to your employees that things are going to change and get better, the more they can start to accommodate their mental processes and mental workflows to be prepared for that change and to have the flexibility to recognize at startup, things aren't going to go well. There are going to be problems, but there is a plan in place to handle it. Again, warehouse automation readiness comes down to making sure you've selected the right systems for your processes, for your digital transformation, and then putting those key elements in place that support that digital transformation. Now, I've been talking about for 25 minutes now. What I'd like to do is transition to some things talking about not just the implementation, but where the return on investment goes. We partner with NetSuite on many cases for WMS implementations at Barcoding, and we help support their customers with warehouse readiness. And we work in lockstep with NetSuite to make sure that they've got the right things in the right place at the right time. Anytime you implement a new system, you're going to want to set up a sandbox or test environment. In order for a test environment to work, you still need those same basic elements: Wi-Fi, mobile devices, labels. You need to be able to identify your products just to test it up and work through your processes. If you're storyboarding it, that's not testing. Storyboarding it is walking through the process to see whether or not those processes exist. Storyboarding does not confirm that the processes actually work in your environment. You need to use the actual devices that you plan on using to test the system out to make sure it functions. And that's really part of that engagement. A typical WMS implementation takes about 12 weeks from start to finish. I have seen WMS implementations go quick and dirty and get in 3 weeks, but take 6 weeks to come up to speed. I've seen them done efficiently, taking 12 weeks to sometimes 24 weeks to get on board, and cutting over with very good, close connectivity with both the employees and management and the integrators that are working together, and seeing it come off fairly smoothly. So I can't emphasize this enough. Plan, communicate, and have preparations in place for when things aren't going to go well. Anytime you're going to implement change inside of a warehouse, you're going to lose productivity for the first 3 weeks, maybe 3 days. It's all going to depend upon your workforce and how well you plan for those changes. But you're changing their process. The shortcuts they used to take that weren't as accurate but got product out the door fast resulted in a lot of unnecessary returns. But from their point of view, they pack boxes faster. Now that you're asking them to scan barcodes, it's slowing down their process, so their throughput is not what they want it to be. However, the end result is a more accurate shipment for your customers and more satisfaction for those customers. So you have to communicate those benefits to your frontline employees so that they understand why you're making the changes and what those changes will affect, not only for their compensation, but for the company as a whole, and make sure that you've got enough additional personnel to supplement your existing personnel as you go through this change so that your customers don't see a drop in fulfillments. Key things to keep in mind. So let's talk about costs versus value. So a lot of people say, well, I'm just going to put in a WMS because it's a great idea. Well, management may not think so. The dirty secret about warehousing is many times the warehouse had been the last bastion in the business to get any attention because they just ship goods. We don't care. They're not necessarily involved in our day-to-day. Well, that's completely changed. Warehousing and logistics is now the front-facing portion of your business because that's the point that touches the customer. More so than sales, when that product comes through the door, that's where you get customer retention. If they receive the wrong product, you've now reduced customer retention. So the warehouse is fundamentally important. How fulfillment happens is fundamental to how successful your business can be. But how do you figure out what that return on investment is going to be? Again, I'm looking at a small to medium-sized business for these calculations, and I'm going to kind of build out what a cost calculation for a warehouse management system might be. Let's take a look at this over a 5-year span and assume that you've got a warehouse with 22 users per shift. Your per user license cost in year one for a warehouse management system is around $3,300. Your burden cost for a device, so putting a mobile device in their hands is about $2,200. And your supported cost per device is around $300. So not only do you have to put a device in their hands to get their job done, you have to make sure that that device remains operational. Due to break fix, due to changes in operating system, due to changes in application, it's probably going to cost you between $12 and $24 per month per device to make sure those devices remain effective for your warehouse. Just as an example, a cloud-based WMS license for 22 users is going to be around 72 grand per year. You're going to throw in at the start of that process about 10 grand for integration to make sure that it ties into your ERP system. If that cloud-based WMS comes from your ERP system, you may not have to integrate, but there's always process changes. Incorporate that into your costing. And professional services are probably going to be around 45K to lift everything up and get it in place, and that includes training, implementation, and all that other fun stuff. If you don't currently have warehouse labeling in place, and I'm assuming we're talking about pallet locations, it's probably going to cost you around 20 grand to get all of your warehouse locations identified appropriately. That could be one-up labels, could be totem labels, but assuming you've got, say, 200,000 square feet with 1,000 pallet locations, that's generally your cost. If you want to throw up a wireless network over that situation, again, for 200,000 square feet, 50K is probably a good estimation. So year one, it's going to cost you around $200,000 to get your costs out. Now thereafter, it just comes down to that software as a service cost or that device as a service cost. So it's going to be about operating expenses of around $79,000 or $80,000 per year. So let's take a look at where the benefits are for this. If you take a look at the annual employee turnover cost, a warehouse management system should reduce your annual turnover. And the reason is if you've gone from a system that's paper-based and you bring in new employees from a system that are used to scanning barcodes and using mobile devices, they're probably not going to hang around very long because they can't get the same type of efficiency that they were used to. So you see a lot of turnover in manual environments. The numbers for this are kind of interesting. The average annual salary for warehouse workers is around $28,000, and this is 2019, 2020 numbers. That has gone up somewhat significantly due to the COVID issues, but based on those numbers, your annual burden cost per employee is around $35,000 because you have payroll, taxes, and benefits and that sort of thing. Current annual turnover rate is around 20% industry standard. So 1 in 5 employees is going to disappear. If you've got 40 employees in your warehouse, that means every year you're going to have to bring up and train 8 new employees. The standard rate for cost of hiring versus the annual salary is 21%. So for all of those $35,000 employees, you're going to spend an extra $7,300 to bring them into the store to actually start working. A warehouse with 40 employees has an annual turnover cost of around $58,000 or almost $60,000 a year. That's above and beyond the cost of actually paying the employees. That's the cost of bringing in new employees to replace the ones that leave. So the rate of expected reduction for turnover with engaged warehouse workers is around 24%. If you can reduce your turnover by 24%, you're going to bring it down from 8 to 6. And that means you're going to gain about 14 grand in your pocket of less expenses for an annual turnover benefit with engaged employees. Now, this is not a lot of money. Honestly, it's chump change. But I want you to pay attention to the fact that these types of benefits can be calculated based upon actual information that you have as an employer. So let's take a look at some more important benefits. Productivity savings is the #1 reason people go to a warehouse management system using automated identification and data capture. Those same 40 employees are going to become 15% more productive once they start scanning barcodes instead of using paper-based processes. That gives you an annual productivity savings of $245,000. Part of that comes from the fact that you're going to be reducing that data entry clerk who's taking all that paper back in and keying it back in. But the main savings comes in productivity. Those workers are going to be able to put out 15% more picks, more product, more shipments than they did before using the same labor force. Another benefit has to do with accuracy. And how do you gauge that? Well, one of the ways of taking a look at your accuracy is looking at the cost per error on shipments and your current accuracy rate for shipments. So based upon the number of orders you pick per day in a warehouse with 40 workers, 2,500 is not a huge number. 2,500 is probably a fairly good average. Assuming they have 262 work days, we can do the math. Your annual accuracy cost is around $327,000. That's because they're performing 63 errors per day at a cost of $20 per error to handle that error on the return. And this is a low ball estimate, very low ball estimate. So not only do you have to pay for the shipment on the return, you have to pay for the joy of inspecting that return and determining whether or not that product goes back into stock or has to be discarded or resold at a lower price. All of these things mean that an accuracy of, an error rate of roughly 2.5% is costing a company around $327,000 a year. Now, if you can improve your accuracy by just 2%, bring that from 97.5 up to 99% roughly, you're going to drop your errors per day down to 25. That means your accuracy cost drops to $131,000 per year. So your improvement, your savings, is $196 or almost $200,000 a year in annual accuracy rate and benefits based upon that. So let's take a look at some of the other benefits. Carrying cost. If you have inventory in stock, you have a certain amount of cost required to be expensed just because you have inventory. It's occupying a bin location. It's occupying floor space. And you have to pay taxes on that product as it sits on your shelf. The average on-hand inventory valuation for a warehouse of about 200,000 square feet could be said to be around $10 million. Of that, 8% of that is safety stock that you keep on hand simply because you don't know whether or not you have enough stock on hand. Because your accuracy levels are a bit lower, you keep more safety stock to make sure that you can fulfill the orders as expected. Your carrying cost for that safety stock as a percentage of value comes down to about $200,000. 25% of that value of safety stock, $200,000 is your annual carrying cost. If you can reduce your annual safety stock due to accuracy improvements, and you're going to bring that from 8% down to 5%, you actually can reduce your carrying costs from $200,000 to $120,000 and save 80 grand. That's enough to pay for all of your mobile devices. So if we take a look at the value summary overall, and we assume that an implementation for a warehouse management system takes about 6 months. Industry standards says somewhere between 6 to 12 months. But we're going to assume that you're going in efficiently, you're keeping things simple, you're not customizing the process, you're not customizing the software to match your process, but you're using the industry standard processes to customize your warehouse. That being said, if we're going to phase this in January of 2021, we expect to realize our benefits at about 60%. We're not going to get 100% of the benefits in the first year because, well, we're starting to get to know the system. We've got to be able to manage our change. On that basis, you're going to increase your cumulative cash flow by $110,000. So you've dropped a lot of money into building a system, but you're still going to get benefits back first year. Second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, the improvements keep happening. And you're getting that cumulative investment cost compensated for by the cumulative benefits. Just to put this in perspective, those of you who've gotten your MBAs can take a look at the net present value, and the net present value from in January is around $1 million with a return on investment over time of 347%. That's fairly compelling. But what I want you to focus on is the monthly delay cost. In that first year of implementing a WMS, your annual benefit should be $321,000. That's a cost of roughly $27,000 per month for every month that you postpone the implementation or delay that implementation. We're seeing the impact of that delay cost right now across the supply chain because we can't get product in to satisfy requirements to implement some of these systems. The equipment's just not coming in from China fast enough. So if you've got questions, I'd be more than happy to address them at this time. Warehouse readiness is really going back to basics on fundamentals, getting all of your identifications in order and getting them machine readable using barcodes, preferably using GS1 standards, is really going to enable you to become much more efficient, much more accurate, and connected to your supply chain, and connect your employees to the work that they're doing. It's vitally important that your employees are connected to what they're doing and able to make use of the same types of efficiencies in the warehouse that they're used to using from day to day. One of the key things that I've seen happening over the industry over the past few years is something called modernization. As they're transferring from their older WMS systems using terminal emulation to a more modern GUI, web-based, or at least graphical user interface process for their employees, it makes a huge difference in reducing onboarding time and reducing turnover because they're moving to a much more automated and a much more familiar system using the same type of interface they have in their hand when they want to call you or make arrangements to talk to you to get a job. That same familiarity from their mobile phones to what they're using in the warehouse really reduces the amount of training that has to go into the process, and they can get focused on the work that needs to be done much faster and much more efficiently. We talk a lot about automation. In order to be ready for automation, all of your manual processes have to be in place. You can't put automation on a poor manual process and expect things to get better. What automation can do is allow you to make more mistakes faster and more efficiently. You really want to make sure your processes are in order, your products are properly identified, so that when you add automation, you're accelerating your business processes that are good processes to make sure that you can do things better. And that's pretty much all I've got to say. If you've got any other questions, feel free to reach out at me at zalinski@uwm.edu. My email is currently active. I'm an alumni at UWM and more than happy to contribute and help out.
Peter, something occurred to me, and I want to thank you as a former leader in operations and supply chain for many years. It's very easy for us to overthink the simplicity of the warehouse. That trucks come in, we put stuff away, we don't. And I think you've taken the cover off of that and shown the tremendous complexity inside the warehouse that needs to be addressed, streamlined, and kind of automated. Can you share some insight into? It seems to me, and I think I've even lived in previous roles, the challenge or the temptation to go direct to suppliers of warehouse solutions without maybe involving an integrator to help me ask those great questions and advance and think through all the detail. What guidance would you give to somebody about that kind of a sin? Kind of go direct to the providers and cut out the middleman, the integrator. It struck me the level of complexity and detail in the questions you might be asking as you put together a system for a potential client.
Well, the way I tell customers is you are the best at what you do, but you don't do warehouse management systems. They are the best at what they do, which is trying to analyze the complexity of an operation and bring it down. You don't always share the same language. I've worked in food and beverage. I've worked in heavy advanced manufacturing. I've worked in service industries and distribution centers where the variety of terms used to describe what they're doing, varies from place to place. And unless you're talking about the same terms, your idea of packing station might be completely different from what your warehouse management system thinks a packing station should be. And you really want to look at what are you trying to accomplish, what are your use cases, and how well do they match up to your warehouse management system. Complicated RFPs are not the way to go, in my opinion. What they usually do is they create a huge wish list for things that you think should happen based upon your experience within your environment, and they don't make use of best standards. They make use of basically perpetuating the same mistakes you've been making in a manual system, but faster using automation and barcodes. And a warehouse management system comes from the other end, using all those best practices and helping you to transform your business to make it a better process. You usually need some kind of a moderator in between to make sure those things happen properly. I've seen really good project champions who can handle that moderation within a company, but I've also seen situations where they're running mean and lean, especially on the IT side and on the management side. And they're so busy trying to get their current operations to continue to run on a daily basis that they don't have the time or the bandwidth to ask the difficult questions of how do we get from point A to point B. I think you and I both know the statistics, 70% of all IT projects fail.
Yeah.
Modernization and WMS is a huge IT project. And you have to make sure you allocate the correct resources to make sure that you're not one of that 70%, that you're one of that 30% who achieves success. And apply that 80-20 rule. 80% of the stuff is going to work really well. 20% of it's going to be a challenge. Go into that knowing everything's not going to go perfectly. And you'll be much better set up for an actual success because you'll be able to accommodate and be agile and make changes. I think the biggest sin I've ever seen with a warehouse management system is a company who insists on customizing the warehouse management system to match their current processes, because they will invest thousands, sometimes tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to automate a poor system just because that's the only one they know, rather than looking at it at a global whole going, hey, if I want to get something from point A to point B, I could use the straight line thing, or I could keep walking around the neighborhood randomly until I get there like I do now. There's a lot of things that can run into play where you can stepwise improve using that WMS and turning things on to help change over to a much more automated and more directed system, and kind of slowly extract the tribal knowledge from your workforce and allow them to work better and faster.
Thank you. Great insight, and really giving us the truth about the complexities within warehouse management systems and kind of product receipt, transformation, and then shipment to the customer who pays the bills. And it is not always as simple as it seems on the surface. Are there other questions out there? Just give it 20 seconds.
I can actually throw up one question I had earlier. It came in from kind of left field at first, but then I recognized where it was coming in from. Within the food and service industry, with food and beverage, and within things like pharmaceuticals and some of the advanced manufacturing, they're getting a lot of push towards compliance for industry standards for track and trace. Unless you digitalize, unless you're making use of those industry standards, you're going to find it really hard to be in compliance, both at an FDA level and at a supply chain level, to make sure that you're actually shipping the product that you say you're shipping. Oh, good question. I see this one. So they're asking about the big players like Amazon using 4.0 now. They definitely are. What about the smaller mid-sized companies? Small and mid-sized companies are actually taking advantage of the WMS 4.0 by adding automation to their systems and processes and making use of all of those industry best standards. A good example of this, a lot of this buy online, pick up in store works really great. But if you're buying online and it's being shipped by Amazon, it may not be fulfilled by Amazon. It may be fulfilled by someone else acting as Amazon. And that's a 4.0 connectivity issue, because not only do they have to get the customer orders from Amazon to pick the product in their facility, they have to report back to Amazon and to the customer what was shipped, when it was shipped, how accurately it was shipped, and or when they can expect their shipment. That involves a lot of connectivity and a lot of planning. And even small and medium-sized businesses now have the capability of doing those things now.
Great, Peter, thanks for answering that question, and thank you, Xiang, for asking. If there are no other questions, I just want to, we have one more question. Peter, I don't know if you can see it. How might barcoding implementation integration help towards machine learning, statistical applications, and forecasting?
Oh,
it's all about analytics.
It's all about having better information and a good single source of truth. You really can't do machine learning or statistical applications unless the data behind it is accurate. And if your warehouse or your retail space is only at 66% accuracy, how well do you think you're going to be able to fulfill those orders? And again, that's an industry-wide statistic. Retail on the floor in the store has a 66% degree of accuracy on what they have in stock. That means right size, right color, right product may not be there 2/3 of the time it's going to be there. The other third of the time, you're left looking and hunting because you don't know where it is. You need to have accurate information on what's in store. Barcoding implementation helps with that, but in the case of retail, especially the soft clothing industry, RFID is becoming a huge factor. Some of your major sporting goods companies, everything that they purchase now is source tagged with an RFID tag. That means that they can get accuracy on what's in store by putting in overhead readers and paying attention to where product is. Kind of amazing.
Thank you, Peter. I don't see any other questions. So with that, Peter, thank you so much for kind of taking the lid off the complexity of the journey to transform and digitize our warehouse operations to make them leaner, meaner, and much more insightful in terms of the analytics and the actual results of the efforts that are going on in those spaces.